Live from the Panera Studios, it's the Reading with Robin show, brought to you each week by my friends at Panera Bread, where it's so much more than green, where their salads bring a lot more to the table with satisfying textures and colors that make every bite worth taking. There's so many to choose from. There's nothing I like more than a wonderful salad for lunch. Try the Southwest Chili Lime Ranch salad, or my favorite, their delicious Greek salad with romaine lettuce, vine-ripened tomatoes, feta, pickled red onions, and Kalamata olives with salt and pepper tossed with their special Greek dressing. As always, available in whole or half. It's all at your neighborhood Panera. And now, enjoy the show. I've been looking forward to this interview ever since my daughter and I received copies of Salt Houses over the winter. I can't believe how long ago that was.
Oh, thank you so much.
Amazing. A gorgeous debut novel. And there's nothing like a debut novel. You're welcome. That embodies everything I love about reading a story about home and family. It's pub day for Hala Alyan's gorgeous novel, Salt Houses. She's an award-winning Palestinian-American poet and clinical psychologist whose work has appeared in numerous journals, including the Missouri Review, Prairie Schooner, and Colorado Review. She resides in Brooklyn with her husband. It is a pleasure to welcome you to Reading with Robin. Hala.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this.
My pleasure. I mean, I remember when certain books arrive and you can just tell this was the case. And your team at HMH is so fabulous, and they also know what I like. And so this package arrived, and there's a picture on Facebook of my daughter and I both reading the book in bed. It was.
Oh, that's you.
Yeah, it's me.
Oh, I know that photograph. That photo made my month because it was the very first picture of the book in other people's hands.
This is like, sometimes you sit down with a book and I'm reminded why I'm such a reader and why I love to read. And reading Salt Houses was that kind of book. And the finished book, I mean, the galley was gorgeous enough, but the finished book is really a treat. So happy Pub Day. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's such an exciting time.
It's an amazing time, right? After all this, first of all, your story is so incredible because you're like, just don't do enough things. I mean, just such an underachiever. And I mean, it's crazy slacker. And I should say, too, I am thrilled to have you join us. You will be at Point Street Reading Series in July. It's always the third Tuesday, so you can come see Hala in Providence, Rhode Island on the third Tuesday. Is that July 18th, I think? And where else will you be as long as we're on your tour topic?
So I'm going to be, so the New York events are, so this week, Wednesday, tomorrow is going to be at Center for Fiction in Manhattan. Thursday is going to be at Greenlight Books, the Fort Greene store in Brooklyn. And then I'm going to be part of the Penn World Voices Lit Crawl on Friday. And then on Monday, it's going to be at the Asian American Writers Workshop with a couple of other Arab American poets who are fantastic. And then I'm going to be I'm going to be in Philly, I'm going to be in D.C., I'm going to be in Boston, and then I'll be in San Francisco and in Seattle.
Well, they've got you all over the place. I'm glad to know that this book will be getting out there. There's so many things to talk about in this book. Salt Houses. Start with the title, because right there, there's such a curiosity of what is this book going to be about? How is that going to figure in? What is so present about the salt?
So it had a different title that.
Oh, really?
I was very attached to the other title, and I'm so glad my agent, because my agent was like, this. It's an interesting title. It has nothing to do with the book. I had a title that really just referred to one scene in the book.
Ooh, what was it? I have to know.
It was the Carnival Sky.
Ah,
and it was referencing one character looking at bombs lighting up in the distance and thinking about it, reminding them of a carnival. Right. So it's it's cool in that it references one moment, but other than that, it had nothing to do with the book. And so my agent, Michelle Tessler, was like, you have to, I think we're going to need a new title. And I kind of just brainstormed. I slept on it. I thought about it for a few days. I sort of made lists. I looked at like a word cloud of
Mm-hmm.
the words that were used the most often in the book, and one of them was houses, and I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then,
Sure.
I have this scene where one of the patriarchs in his old age is thinking back to all the different places they've lived in and thinking of them as structures made of salt that can kind of vanish with the tide. And so I was like, oh, that's the perfect. Like,
it's
it kind of
perfect
clicked for me, and she likes it. Yeah.
I love that. When you can always use the other title for another poem, right? I mean, if you love the
Exactly. I scrolled away.
Exactly. There's always something that you can do with that. I love to recycle things. Something that I get attached to. Often if I get attached to something, I think, what else can I do with that? And then sometimes that just makes more work. But
I know.
as you're so prolific, I am confident that you will find a home for that other gorgeous title.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you dedicate this to your family, and you say, for my family who gave me stories to tell. It's so funny, like sometimes I'll talk about dedication, and people like gloss over that. I love to read every little inch of a book. It's all so important, especially this inscription to your family.
Mm.
Was that like a slam dunk, this is exactly how I'm doing it, or was that labored over?
I sort of, I'm very similar to you. I love reading dedications. I love reading acknowledgement pages. I love to think about what went on, for, like what happened behind the scenes for this book to be in my hands. And I struggled a little bit for a while. I was going to single out certain people in the family to thank in particular, dedicate it to in particular, but I just kept wavering and kept going back and forth, and it was sort of an impossible, like, trying to identify one person who was more influential than the other when, everybody kind of was part of it. And so it just, when I finally came to it, I was like, that's it. It's like inclusive enough and specific enough that I think it works for everybody involved.
In the question and answer, you talk about the story mirroring your family's history, and you mentioned that if you were too close to certain situations in the family, they would never let you forget
Definitely.
it. The story is about family, a good family to keep happy. And
they are definitely a family you want to keep on your good side, yeah.
Now, do you have a brother?
I do.
I sound like a psychic. And do you have a brother, Hala?
Right.
Because the sister-brother relationship in this book, Alia and Mustafa, I hope I'm getting all the names right.
No, that's right, yeah.
I read this book in December, and I reread it recently, but still, it was so important to me to get those things, to get the details and the names right. But their bond is so strong, I thought to myself, she must have a brother that she loves very dearly.
Yes. I do. I have a brother who is probably my closest friend, certainly my staunchest ally. We were extremely close. It was actually quite difficult. I mean, I think I knew exactly what I wanted that relationship to look like. The closeness is very similar. The details obviously a little bit different, but
sure.
It was very hard for me to then have to have the things that happened to the family in terms of law and all of that to happen, because I did after a while start to feel like I'm really attached to these people and I'm kind of superstitious, and like it was like there's a little. I feel like I dove real deep into this family for a while.
So you were writing and knocking wood at the same time.
100%. That's how I live my life. I talk and I knock constantly. Yeah. I have to refrain from doing it in session with clients.
I was wondering that. I mean, you're a woman of science, right? I know it's very interesting. And one of the things that I'm speaking with Hala Alyan, and her brand new book, her debut novel is Salt Houses. It's out today. Find her on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, I think, or that maybe that one.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram.
Okay. I know, where it said private, so I wasn't sure if I'm supposed to say that.
Oh, no, please do. Yeah, so just to be clear, I put it on private just for clients, but anyone who wants to add me, I always add them.
Okay, that was, I'm always wondering about that, and you just made it clear why. And you can also visit her website at Hala Alyan. You can see her in Providence, Rhode Island on Tuesday, July 18th. I sure hope that's the Tuesday. At Point Street Reading Series. I'm very excited. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was the superstition and the evil eye and that whole, because, we're talking about different cultures and ethnicities and all of that. There's so much to discuss about this book, and they're all so similar, really. So I was reading that. The story opens with the night before Alia's wedding, with a lot of names.
Yeah.
and
Alia's wedding.
Alia's wedding, and her mother reading the coffee dregs. And so you know, talk about what that's like and how superstition and all of that figures in. I mean, I grew up like this too, so it's very hard not to do it just in case.
Yes. It's very much one of those things where it's like, well, why not? Right? It's better to be on the safe side. But I do, but I mean, I can contain myself. But it's sort of like a context specific sort of thing. But definitely, I mean, I think the book, you know, I mean, it opens with, you know, a scene of like fortune telling essentially, and with this assumption, with this idea that I think is a cornerstone in many non-Western cultures, that, you know, our lives are fated to a certain extent, you know, that we can make certain decisions that can kind of change the path a little bit, but that for the most part that, you know, we come into this world with a destiny that's sort of been determined for us. And it sort of is the crux of the book, right? Because we kind of open with that with the mother kind of thinking about her daughter and thinking about what will come next, and sort of reading this fortune that she probably shouldn't be reading because you're not supposed to do it for people that you love, because it kind of clouds it. And then,
that's tricky right there because of the attachment to the person who you're reading. But yet, how can you not if this is an ability that you have?
And it's very similar to, you know, I mean, this is going to sound silly, but like it's also, isn't that like therapy in some ways, right? Like, I mean, there's certain things that we shouldn't do with and for people that we're too close to because we simply can't be objective. Right. And we probably won't be very efficient at it. And I think, you know, that was in some way things like reading the coffee dregs or fortune telling. Like, I mean, those were versions of therapy that existed a long time ago. And obviously it's been tweaked and changed over the generations, but I do think, you know, there's certain elements that stay even with, you know, first generation, second generation, like people that you see in Western cultures now.
And also as poet, I mean, you have, like I said, the whole package because the book is just so gorgeous. There's just such a melody that runs through the story. It is lovely. I mean, everybody must read Salt Houses, out today by Alyan, and find her on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere. And if you can see her on tour, do so. She'll be all over the place, and especially at Point Street Reading Series on the third Tuesday of July. Very excited about that. Talk about how you sort of balance the writing and the science, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me at least, they seem to complement each other nicely, like the way that I've been able to, I feel very lucky for the way that I've been able to sort of carve out space for both of them in my life. I think I was drawn to clinical psychology for many of the same reasons that I've been drawn to writing. In that, you know, I mean, there's a focus on narrative, there's a focus on taking chaos and ordering it and making sense of it. Kind of repiecing it, rewriting endings. I think a lot of the skills that are required in psychotherapy in terms of being a good listener, a good observer, being able to recognize patterns that might exist in a narrative are all, you know, they're all very useful things for writing as well. Not to mention just having to think a little bit about like, well, what are the incentives of this, you know, what are the motivations of this character? What are the things that they want? What are the things they're afraid of? So I think it kind of trains you to look at the world in a way that is, as far as I'm concerned, for me at least, it's been very compatible with writing.
It makes total sense. And there's a scene in the book where throughout the book, Alia's husband, Atif, writes these letters. So I was wondering if that was something, because it seemed to be, unless, God forbid, knock on wood, they should be found.
Right.
It's a really good thing to do. I mean, that's something that always is fascinating to me about journaling and letter writing and all of that, of what we leave behind and what the intention was, which could be misinterpreted depending on who reads them. But talk a little bit about his letter writing and really a little bit about what the book's about, because we haven't talked even about that yet. There's so much to discuss.
That's right. I just realized I didn't say anything about it. So basically,
no, I didn't ask you. Don't worry. It's not your fault. I didn't ask you yet.
So So it's basically a multi-generational story of a Palestinian family that starts with the matriarch in the early 60s in Palestine, what is now the West Bank, and kind of follows the family's trajectory after the Six-Day War in 1967 when they moved to Kuwait, and then once again when they're displaced after Saddam's invasion in 1990. And at that point, what were children are now grown adults who have their own families, and they end up kind of scattered in cities like Boston and New York, Boston and Paris and Beirut, and it's basically like an exploration of family ties in the context of immigration and diaspora and political turmoil.
And what's really fascinating too is that you don't see as many books, certainly novels that are written in that region, but a different perspective than we're used to often, certainly.
Sure.
And so, which is so necessary, so today, and with the proliferation of book clubs, discussion, understanding, every culture has had its moment of being displaced, wronged, all of this, really just having the sense of compassion in general. And so there's
Absolutely.
there's just so much to talk about. And for me, reading this book too, it was so interesting, obviously things that I thought of, but when you're reading about this family and all of these families and them being uprooted, can't help but compare to all the cultures who've always been thrown out of every place. It's just dizzying, really, to think about how it just keeps going, and how drives the generations and why people feel the way they do on certain topics. So it was just such an important book on so many levels for me, and just so timely, really.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really hard to hate things that we understand. Mm-hmm. And I think that art and literature and music and even like stand-up comedy, those forms of expression can play a really valuable role, especially today, at a time when I think it is definitely, it behooves the powers that be in certain systemic, institutionalized systems of power, it behooves them to keep division, right? Like to propagate hate and propagate division and ignorance, right?
Yes.
And so I think that it is actually a really powerful. It can be an incredibly powerful thing to, read a story about a place that you don't know, or to read a narrative that challenges a narrative that you've grown up with or have always, come to understand from a particular lens. And I think that art has this really cool, quirky role in that, because it can kind of do it in this really subtle, like, we're just talking, we're just telling stories, we're just looking at a painting, these are just photographs, and I think it does this really neat thing of having people lower the defenses and be more likely to digest information that otherwise might have felt a little bit threatening because it's so different. And
it's such a connector, yes, the art.
Yes, we're always afraid of things that are different.
So connecting, and I think that one of the things that I'm sure, what are you hearing in terms of that? And then the book's just out today, but obviously the galleys are out and people are reading. Has anything surprised you? What's some feedback that you've gotten?
Robin, all of this is a surprise to me. I still can't come to terms with the fact that the book is a book and that it went with a big publishing house. All of it is sort of. I feel like my brain's still catching up with the fact that I found an agent and everything else that had been happening. Wow. So it's been a very bewildering in the best possible way, disorienting in the best possible way. I feel very lucky. I feel very grateful. I think that those things sometimes sound like sort of like false modesty or humility, but in reality, it's, the stories like this are written all the time, and it takes a combination of opportunity and timing and privilege and luck for certain stories to be plucked out and to be pushed into a certain amount of spotlight. And so I'm never, I never forget that this is, I'm very grateful for the fact that this story happened to be one of those that has been reaching people, and simply in the, and by that I just mean literally, the book has been reaching people physically, and they've been able to read it,
Yeah.
And so that for me already is like so much more than I ever expected would happen. And I think in terms of reactions, you know, people have had just the loveliest things to say, and I've heard from a lot of people just that, like, you know, this was not something that I've ever thought about from this perspective. That this was, you know, I found myself kind of, I've heard a couple people say, like, they kind of came into it not really knowing what to expect and maybe a little bit wary, and then kind of maybe fell a little bit in love with the family, and then realized in doing that they were, they were, you know, sympathizing with this particular narrative, or they were reading about this particular narrative with defenses lowered. And, you know, I think it's a very humbling and very powerful thing to witness.
Well, there are so many people. I cannot wait to get this book into their hands. And I'm speaking with Hala. You're welcome. Alyan, who will be at Point Street Reading Series on July 18th here in Providence, Rhode Island, but she will be everywhere else. So check her website for more information. Salt Houses is out today. It is a Reading with Robin alert. If you love what I love, and you do because you're listening to the podcast, you will love this book. This is one of my. It's just one of these books that I'm going to be. You know, because when you read it so far ahead, I know what people have to look forward to. So I had May 2nd in my head for so long because, again, your team is so stellar, and when they send me something, I take note. And this one came, and it was like cold, wintry day, and we sort of snuggled up with it, and it was just like, I remember emailing Taryn and saying, yes, this is what I like. Yes, thank you. Thank you for sending this to me, because like you say, there are so many books, so many that we never see, so many that we see that don't get attention, all of this. And that's one of the things that excites me. It's why I started Reading with Robin in the first place, is to simply share books that I loved and connect readers and writers. And that's what I do. So when something like this comes along, I just remember, you know, like I said, I sort of remember why I love this so much, and that my daughter and I, when we love the same book, then it's even more of a slam dunk. So,
that is so exciting. Yeah.
So on top of that, so people will be very excited to get Salt Houses into their hands. The books that I was reading here, 2 books that you grew up reading, immigrant stories that influenced you. You mentioned Amy Tan and Jhumpa Lahiri and Chitra. I can't pronounce that name, so I didn't.
Eva Kumari, yeah.
Thank you. I did not want to.
I'm probably butchering it as well.
No, well, but somehow if I do, it will sound worse. But who are some of the current writers today who are writing immigrant stories? I mean, I think of Mira Jacobs' Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing is one of my favorites.
It is that book, like,
right? Gorgeous.
Oh my god! It's so good. It's so beautiful. It's so just powerful and poignant. I mean, I really enjoyed The Turner House.
I didn't read that one.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's not immigrant per se, but it's a multi-generational family story about a Black family in Detroit, and so it's just a really powerful.
Oh, good. I wrote it down. I wrote that one down. Well, that's the thing, multi-generational family stories, being able to see, really get into the everyday life of who came before us, because when we meet certain family members, we have a vision of them and can't even imagine what they were like before that. You know, so when you're reading these stories and you see where traits are passed down, or why things are done or not done, or the history of a particular situation in a family, I think it's fascinating. I mean, certainly as a clinical psychologist, this is what you pair through and work around. These are things that just are fascinating to me. So when they're blended into a story, what's better than that?
Right. And it's a really interesting, one of the things that I realized has been coming up for me, and it took me a while to realize why it felt so strange, like praise has felt really strange and interviews have felt a little strange. And then I realized, you know what? Writing this book was a very collectivist process.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of listening and recreating and re-envisioning stories that took generations and tribes to build.
Yeah.
But then the feedback, right, the publication process, the praise, the reinforcement, the interview, like that's very individualistic. And so it took me a while to be like, there's even a bicultural tension there existing on a macro level of what's happening with the book. Because clearly, obviously I'm the one that sat down and wrote it, right? So I understand why they're not going to be like, bring everybody in your family, not everybody. So I I understand why it plays out the way that it plays out, but it has taken me a little bit of time. And when I had that kind of epiphany, I was like, oh, that's what it is. It's because it feels like it's praise in some ways that's misplaced, because it's like, oh, this took literally this took the whole cliche of it takes a village to raise a child. Like, it took villages to create, these sort of stories. But I guess, it's just how it is. I will take it.
So you take it, and you wrote this beautiful story, and the villages that it took to create, I'm sure their arms are around you in telling their stories.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Absolutely. That's a really lovely way of putting it.
Thank you. Speaking of lovely ways of putting things, I mean, so I have so many things dog-eared, because I will do that with the finished copy, but this is my galley. And talking about this part here about nostalgia is an affliction. Someone said that once in front of Alia, and the words reach her now years later like a fever or a cancer, the longing for what had vanished, wasting a person away, not just unbearable losses, but the small things as well. Just that idea of what we don't know or what we've lost, and you say here, you cannot forget them in your grief. That's a line that plays out. I mean, what is... Yeah. Talk about that line, you cannot forget them in your grief. That's like something to stitch on a pillow and put somewhere. It's just so meaningful.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is an interesting moment in my life, because the matriarch of my family just passed away. My grandmother recently passed away in Beirut. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
And so it's funny how certain lines in the book that I wrote, again, I wrote that, have come back to me, and it's so fascinating that you bring up that line, because that's been one of them, and I do think that ends up being the mantra for many immigrants, for many asylum seekers, for many refugees, for many members of diaspora, for people who have to leave countries and villages and worlds and people behind. Whether that's because of death, or it's because of crisis, or it's because of political turmoil, that I do think that one of the things that is most fascinating to me about us as people is our resilience. Mm-hmm. And that idea that, you in some ways there's a duty to carry on and to continue to take what remains, whatever it is, right? What remains of that lineage, what remains of that history, what remains of that collective consciousness and that collective memory of a tribe or of a family, and to take it with you, and wherever it is that you may go next, and to pass it along to the generations that come after you. I think it's it was just something that I saw people do it growing up. It was definitely something that I saw, especially the older generations, say things along lines of how important it is to just move forward even when it feels like we can't.
We're duty bound to do that. I mean, anytime I've ever thought of difficult times and how you sort of move through, you realize that you do have to. And one of the things when I was talking earlier about past generations, or understanding what their lives were like at the moment, because we haven't known them, we didn't know them as children, as young people, never knowing what some of their challenges might have been, certainly as they come out through the years, right? But when you're a kid with your grandparents around and they're just taking care of everybody, you wouldn't have known the day-to-day struggles, because they've then carried it through. So anytime things get sort of tough, and I think, like that, I think, well, for the next generations, and that's why. And that's why we continue and tell the stories and bring the family along and those who came before us. I mean, there's a reference to that. And you honor your family so deeply with Salt Houses. And, again, I am so excited to share this with the audience. It's your debut novel. It's Hala Alyan's gorgeous book, and she will be in Providence, Rhode Island on July 18th, and also in many other places. And visit her website for those stops along the Salt Houses tour. I also took it. There's actually also another picture. I don't know if you saw it, but I took it when the finished copy came with really ingeniously a salt shaker.
Oh, I did see that. I did see it.
I mean, it was crystal at least, but I'm like, oh, this is really clever.
Lovely.
Hala's going to just love this. Thank you. Before I let you go, always the last question of the day.
Sure.
What are you reading? What are you loving? I mean, I don't know in between everything else, but what are some of the books or a book that you'd like to recommend for the Reading with Robin
that's
audience?
A great question. Okay. So I recently read The Course of Love by Alain de Botton, and that was beautiful.
Writing this down.
Mm-hmm.
The Course of Love. Okay.
The Course of Love. And We Love You, Charlie Freeman.
Oh, I love that book.
So good, yeah. Have been sort of on this like nonfiction kick. I wasn't really much of a nonfiction person, but I have been reading a lot of that, and I'm actually just starting The Lonely City right now by Olivia. Oh, I'm not sure what her last name is, but it seems very promising, and I'm very excited about that. And then in terms of poetry, I really recommend Portrait of an Alcoholic by Kaveh Akbar, A-K-B-A-R. Yeah, and Look by Salma Sharif are really great.
Great. I like to tag these when people want to know what somebody else is reading. I think people are so curious. Whenever I have an event and authors
totally.
speak and everybody gets out, well, it used to be a pen, now it's their iPhone or whatever. They tap away.
Right.
To let everybody know what you're reading is one of my favorite questions, and often one that is very hard to answer in an interesting twist, but there it is. Yeah. So you did it so well. I will make sure
I was told
those.
To be prepared for these sort of questions with the interviews.
Well, your team,
honest, but I've been prepared. Yes.
Your team has prepared you well, and they have sent this beautiful book out into the world in an exquisite fashion, deserving of this book, and this audience will find it all over the place. It's Salt Houses. Hala, Alyan, it is a pleasure to speak to you. I look forward to meeting you, and enjoy the rest.
I do as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Enjoy Pub Day and all of its exciting stories, and I can't wait to find what you do with that other title and where you place it.
Okay.
And
I love it.
Look forward to more, and enjoy the day.
Thank you so much. You as well. Take care.